Thank you for joining us this evening. We're going to sing a song that we sing sometimes, but it'll be projected, and I will sing praise. Would you join us as we sing together? Would you stand? Join us now as we welcome each other as we continue.
As you may procedure or sick, or if there's been a death in the church or if somebody's in the hospital, you can stick your head in the church office there, and right beside the dry erase board that is our calendar, there's one that has our shut-ins on it. It has a listings of people, whether they're in the hospital sick, or surgery, and then if they're in hospice care or if there's been a death in the church. And so if you're ever curious and you're by here, you can stick your head in there and look and see. And right now there is a list of like, I think 7 or 8 names of people who either had surgery or about to have surgery. And so if you're curious about them and how they're, or who all those may be at times, if we know about it, we try and get it on the board. And so you'll be able to find that information in there, and it'll have on there what the date of their procedure, and like in Alta's case, it had the date, Alta's name, and then it just HIP out beside it. So you'll be able to find that information in the church office, so you can contact them and check on them after their surgery. So with that being said, yes, Terry. It was definitely a good service, and it was awesome to see all these kids up here this morning. You can't plan for that sort of stuff. You know, if you do, that's when you have like 3 kids show up. But I think, did Jake say we had like 34 or something up here this morning? And like he said, that's not the normal. When Robbie Smith was here, our director of missions, for our note burning ceremony our service on the 1st of January, him and Sharon were telling me, he said, we were amazed at the number of kids that come up for your children's sermon. I said, yeah. I said we, a lot of times we have 20 to 25, sometimes even 25 to 35, somewhere around in there. And he said, you just need to understand how blessed you are, because there's a lot of churches that don't have even half that many. And so the Lord has definitely blessed us. And I think that days like today, where we're able to showcase the baptism of a couple of those kids that have made profession of faith, and even an adult, is also, just great. So tonight we are in Genesis chapter 14. Rob, just because your brother Terry asked a question doesn't mean you have to. Yes, you can ask a question. Some of them, most of them. Why? You want me to pronounce these names? Oh, you just wait, buddy. You just wait. You just wait. No, Rob, I'm going to randomly call on people in the congregation to read it tonight, aloud with a microphone. So get ready. Clear your throats and get your Bible translation. Where you can go King James Old School. You can go CSB. I don't care. I'm going to call on y'all. We're going to read it till somebody gets it right. Call on Rob. All right. So, yes, Rob, I am going to be reading some of these verses tonight. And so they are challenging. Nothing like a good ancient Hebrew name in a language that none of us read for us to just really enjoy the Bible, right? Well, tonight we are continuing to dig into the life of Abraham in Genesis chapter 14. And now last time we looked at how Abraham had to separate from his nephew Lot. And the reason for that was they just had too many animals. They had to separate. And so tonight we find out what happens in the aftermath of that. And we find out that we see that Abraham actually went to go rescue Lot after he is kidnapped, so to speak, taken captive. And so tonight, as I said this morning, is one of the more action-packed chapters of the book of Genesis. And the interesting thing is, anytime, I'm going to go ahead and admit to you, anytime I've read this, I've always read it, it's like, okay, there's 5 kings and there's 4 kings. And, well, 5 kings probably came from across the Jordan River and they just got into a fight and they beat the 4 kings. And you get reading this stuff and it's talking about them going and conquering different places. And I've always been like, what is the big deal about this? And so tonight, we have some maps showing us some really interesting information about how all this works. And so I learned a lot in my study this week about this particular chapter that I had never known, because I thought, okay, some of the guys captured Lot and some of the people from Sodom, and they left, and Abraham takes 300 people and they go and attack them. It's a whole lot more action-packed, and there's a whole lot more in this ordeal than, Abraham just come in there and cleaned house and got Lot and took him home. There's a lot more to it than that. And so tonight, as we get started, we're going to be looking at chapter 14. So follow along in your Bibles. We're going to be looking at verses 1 and 2 as we look at the alliances that are playing into tonight's story. It says... Rob, do you want me to read this, or are you volunteering to read this? Oh, all right. I'm going to give my best shot at this. It says, at the time when Amraphel was king of Shinar, Arioch king of Elasar, and Kedorlaomer is the way you pronounce that, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, these kings went to war against Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemember, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. And so chapter 14 starts out telling us that there are these two alliances, that there's this battle that's about to be waged. It says that they went to war. There were these two alliances. And one involved 4 kings from the Babylonian region, and the other were 5 kings from just north of the Dead Sea. And so to put this into perspective, as I said, we've got a map to show you. So Daryl, if you can, show us the map here. So the 4 kings basically covered a lot of this area here, and the king, and I have it, Kedorlaomer, is the king of Elam. And so that's in modern-day Iran, just north of the Persian Sea, or Persian Gulf. And so the 4 kings cover an area like this, and the 5 kings cover, a spot on the wall that big. And so there is a huge difference between the 4 kings and the 5 kings. So don't see it as, as I always did reading it, it's like, oh man, 4 kings, they're outnumbered by 5. No, they weren't. There were a lot more people on that side. And so the king, Kedorlaomer of Elam, was from that Babylonian region. He got 3 other kings to come along with him. And they went and found the kings of Sodom and the king of Sodom and Gomorrah and 3 other kings from their area. And so what we find out in verse 3 is it tells us the location of their battle. Look at verse 3. It says, all these latter kings, talking about the 5 kings from Sodom and Gomorrah's alliance, it says all these latter kings joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Dead Sea Valley. And so the 5-king alliance gathered their forces in this valley of Siddim. And you see where the valley of Siddim is. That is the Dead Sea. That is the Sea of Galilee. Jerusalem is right here. Hebron is down here. And so Sodom and Gomorrah, as best we know, as best we can guess, Sodom and Gomorrah were above the northern shore of the Dead Sea. We don't know that for sure. There are some that believe that they were down in this region, but biblical scholars today generally believe that it was north of the Dead Sea. So we still don't know exactly where it's at, but that is where we believe it would be. So that was where the battle would take place between the 4-king alliance coming from the Babylonian region to face these 5 kings. And so the 5-king alliance is gathering their forces there in the valley of Siddim. Well, verse 4 tells us why they're even going to war, why they're even having this battle. Look at verse 4. It says, for 12 years they had been subject of Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? There's no guessing as to what the issue was. The reason for the battle was real simple. The king had subjugated the people in the region of the sea, or in the Dead Sea region, and they had been subjugated by them for 12 years. And what we see is that in that 13th year, they're like, you know what, we've had enough. We're going to rebel. We're not going to pay tribute. We're not going to send taxes. We're not going to do that anymore. And when King Kedorlaomer gathered help from his surrounding kings, he traveled more than 1,300 miles to once again put those 5 kings in their place, to put them under the rule of him. And so we aren't told the size of the armies that King Kedorlaomer brought with him to Canaan, or the size of the king's armies in the Sodom and Gomorrah alliance. We're not told what it is, but we can figure that the logistics of moving any army 1,300 miles around the northern end of the Arabian desert through modern-day Syria and down through Lebanon into the land of Canaan was not easy. So you've got 4 armies marching for a long time to get there, and they have to take supplies and do all of those things. And so we read, though, in verses 5 through 7 about what happens when Kedorlaomer gets into Canaan and how he begins his strategic stranglehold on the land of Canaan. Look in verses 5 through 7 with me. It says, in the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him went out and defeated the Rephites in Ashtaroth-Canarim, and Zuzites in Ham, and Emites in Shaveh Kiriathim, and the Horites in the hill country of Seir, as far as El Paran near the desert. Then they turned back and went to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and they conquered the whole territory of the Amalekites, as well as the Amorites who were living in Hazazon Tamar. Now, don't go to the map yet, Daryl, okay? Don't go there yet. Now, let me ask you, by reading that text in verses 5 through 7, how many of you have any kind of clue how much they traveled, how many places they conquered, other than you can say, well, they conquered this many places because those are towns or areas? I mean, I've read this, this chapter many times, and I'm thinking, well, it must have been, a couple of little towns here and there that, were right near Sodom and Gomorrah, and then they went and attacked Sodom and Gomorrah's kings. Well, it's kind of interesting when we start looking at it that after getting word, the 5-king alliance from the Babylonian region, they traveled to Canaan, and it took them at least a year, because for 12 years, they were, Sodom and Gomorrah and those kings were under the rule of King Kedorlaomer. And then it says in the 13th year, they rebelled. Then what's the first part of verse 5 say? In the 14th year. So it took them a whole year to find out that, well, at least a year and a half probably, that Sodom and Gomorrah's kings and the others had defected on their taxes or tribute. Then it took them that whole year and a half to not only find out, but then to muster 4 armies and then travel all the way to Canaan, traveling that 1,300 miles. And so it wasn't a matter of like it is today. We can have, soldiers and infantry and different, military people around the globe in a matter of hours, where it took them more than a year to get there and to get in place. And so we see that it took them at least a year from the time the rebellion occurred till they were soldiers on the ground in Canaan. Now, once the 4-kingdom alliance arrived, they began raiding different areas of Canaan. As I said, you see right here that these are, some of these are best guessed by biblical scholars as to the locations, but it makes sense when you read them that the locations would have probably been where we have them on our map. So they come in from the north in Canaan, and they go first, as the scripture tells us, that they go to Ashtaroth-Karnaim, then they go to the Zuzites of Ham, then they go to Shaveh Kiriathim, then they come down to Seir, which would eventually be Seir, which is the land of Esau. Okay, and so that's where the Edomites would have been. And so they go from there to Kadesh, and then they come up and they raid the land of all the Amalekites and the land where the Amorites were at Hazazon Tamar. And so basically they've come in and done a stranglehold on anybody that may have been an ally for those 5 kings. And so they've come in, and it's interesting that they came that close to the region where they were at and didn't attack them. They come in and they start raiding all of these areas. So we don't know if the 5 kings in Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboiim and Zoar, we don't know if they sort of set the example and all these other places rebelled against Kedor Laomer as well. But that may very well have been the case. And so they come in and they capture a lot of loot. They capture a lot of land and get it under subjugation to the king. And, we aren't told why they attacked those people, but most likely it was a strategic plan to take revenue, take, tribute, and to get more people under their thumb, so to speak. And so what we read, though, is that after, this massive onslaught of raiding through the land of Canaan, and we find that in verses 8 through 12, we see that the 5 kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and their allies, they are defeated and defeated easily by the 4 kings. So look at verses 8 through 12 with me. It says, "Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboiim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, marched out and drew up their battle lines in the valley of Siddim against Kedor Laomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goyim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. So see, every time you read it, it sounds like it's a mismatch, and it's not even close to that. And then it says, "Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some of the men fell into them, and the rest fled to the hills. The 4 kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food. Then they went away. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom." So what we see here is that verse 8 tells us that the 5 kings gathered their armies on the battlefield there in the valley north of the Dead Sea, and they fought battle like they did until really the 1800s. They basically got in line and then just charged and fought till somebody died and some teams beat, and that's basically the way that they did it. And so the 5 kings get their soldiers in line and get ready to send them into battle, as we read. And, we see that there wasn't really much of a fight. Does it tell you about how badly they're beaten there? Does it tell you how quickly they're beaten there? No, but, when we read it, if you look at verses 8 and 9 there, it tells us about it. It says that it tells us that, who all's in the battle. We know it's the 5 verses 4. And then verse 10 says, "Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits." It says nothing about the battle. It doesn't say anything other than Sodom and Gomorrah's kings were getting so routed that they started to leave and flee the battlefield, and their men were falling into tar pits. And so the catch is, it was such a rout that it didn't even get described in the pages of Scripture. The 4 kings totally decimated the 5 kings, so much so that it's not even mentioned. And so we don't know if they even fought. The Sodom and Gomorrah's kings, those 5 kings, they could have just ran off when they see that they're outnumbered 2 or 10 to 1 or something like that. We just don't know. What we do know is that the 5 kings are defeated, and the 4 kings took all their goods, all their possessions, but they only took the stuff from Sodom and Gomorrah as listed in the Scriptures. Why they didn't take the stuff from Zeboiim and Admah and Zoar, we don't know. But they only took the stuff from Sodom and Gomorrah. And they took it, and in the stuff that they took from Sodom, they took Abram's nephew Lot and all of his possessions. Now remember, where was Lot at the last time we read about him? When they separated ways, where was Lot at? Do you remember? Was he inside or outside the city of Sodom? Camped outside. So something has happened from the time him and Abram split ways to the point where he left the insecurity of being outside the walls of Sodom and instead has sold all of his stuff and moved in to Sodom and bought him a house in the city, so to speak, and has all kinds of wealth. And so he's in there, and being a part of Sodom, he is captured and taken by the 4 kings. And as we would understand, they're not going to stay in that area. Where are they going to go? They're going to go home. They're going to take Lot and everybody else out of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they're going to become slaves, and they're going to, if they survive the 1,300-mile trip back from Canaan back to the Babylonian region. And so what we read in verses 13 through 16, though, is about Abram's pursuit and how he followed the four kings. It says, a man who had escaped, and we assume that's from Sodom and Gomorrah, came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. Now Abram was living near the great trees of Mamre the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol and Aner, all of whom were allied with Abram. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night, Abram divided his men to attack them, and he routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions, together with the women and other people. So the last time that we heard of Abram, him and Lot had separated, and Lot went to camp outside the city of Sodom, and Abram went south about 35 miles and went to the city of Hebron, or near the city of Hebron, and so that's where he was at. And a man who escaped, as I said, either from Sodom or Gomorrah, we're not really told, traveled down to Hebron to tell Abram that what had happened and that Lot was taken. And so when Abram found out about this, he called together his own four-man alliance. And so it's sort of like this crazy pickup game of basketball, right? You got 5 over here and 4 over here, and now there's another 4, and there's, we got next, so to speak. Abram's like, we're going to take care of this. And so what we see is that when he calls together his own 4-person alliance, it's Abram, Mamre, and his 2 brothers, Eshcol and Aner. And so they were aligned together, and what they do is they head into pursuit of the 4 kings headed back to Babylon. And, when we read this, we aren't told how large a force they have, but we're told what Abram has. He has 318 trained men, meaning he has 318 soldiers of his own. And so imagine how wealthy. We've talked about how wealthy Abraham was, because of all the livestock he had and the things that he'd received in Egypt and one thing and another. This ought to show you really easily how wealthy he was if he was rich enough to have 318 trained soldiers in his house, not counting his servants, not counting, anybody like that. And so he has his 318. We don't know how many Mamre or his brothers have, but they take their armies and their soldiers, and they start to leave. And remember this: how old was Abraham when he left Haran and went to Canaan? Do you remember? He was 75 years old. So at this point, Abram is between 80 and 85 years old, and he's ready to go kick butt and take names. Think about that. He didn't let it slow him down. He went and did exactly what he needed to do. He went to go rescue Lot, so he takes his soldiers, and he's most likely between 80 and 85 at this point, and goes to do what he needs to be done. And so Abram's alliance traveled 130 miles from Hebron, and so this shows you sort of where they came from. Hebron is way down here at the bottom of this map here, and they would have traveled sort of parallel to the way the 4 kings most likely would have left. And so the 4 kings had time on their side, though, because they had left so early, because the much larger party of the 4 kings, plus all the people they were taking with them now, plus all the spoils that they had, were headed out of the Siddim Valley and headed towards Dan, which was a city right there, or a town, and headed north of Damascus. Now, from Dan to Damascus is 40 miles. So they traveled at least 50 or 60 miles north of Dan on their way home, going around the Arabian desert. And so what we see is that after the guy that escaped leaves Sodom and Gomorrah, he had to travel 35 miles, which is probably at best 2 days' journey, maybe 3 days' journey. And then you got Abram and his crew that has to go all the way up here, and they're traveling, somewhere around 130 miles in pursuit of the four kings who have only had to travel 95 miles. And so there is a lot of lead time for the four kings to get away from Abram, but Abram and his group make very short work of this. You know, it's kind of crazy because we read this and it's like, Abram finds out about this from this guy who escaped, and then Abram takes his guys and chases them, and that night they, you know, divide up and conquer them. This was a matter of days, not a matter of just a few minutes, or a few hours or anything like that, because once Abram's group tracked them down, for them to have covered, 130 miles would have taken them, easily, 7 or 8 days. It would have been a long time for them. So this is all going on over about a 2-week period that we read about. And so we see that once they tracked them down, they divided up their group and then attacked the four kings and defeat them. And so they find them, as it talks about, they find them at Dan, right? And so they pursue them and continue to attack them for 50 to 60 miles north of Damascus. A total from Dan to north of Damascus. And so it was, this isn't a, hey, we're going to stand here and fight. These guys are trying to run away for home. And Abram and his group continues to slaughter them, continues to attack them, and to basically put an end to them. And so we see that happens. And once the fighting is over, Abram rescued Lot and recovered his possessions and all those people from Sodom and Gomorrah and head back. Well, this is where things get kind of interesting with Abram's return. And this is what we see in verses 17 through the end of the chapter in verse 24. So follow along with me and we'll see about Abram's return. It says, after Abram returned from defeating Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him. I'm so glad they said that. The kings allied with him. Why could they not have said that earlier? Anyway, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh. That is the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. El Elyon, one of the names for God that we studied several years ago in our Names of God series. That is the name that is used here when Melchizedek and when Abram call God Most High. It's El Elyon. They're using the same name in the Hebrew for God. And so it says, and he blessed Abram, saying, blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hands. Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. The king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the people and keep the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, with raised hand I have sworn an oath to the Lord God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or a strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abram rich. I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten, and the share that belongs to the men who went with me, to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share. So Abram is met by the king of Sodom. He comes out and he meets him in this place called the Valley of Shaveh. And you know this place as a different name. It's actually the name of a city known as Jerusalem. So this is where they meet. So the king of Sodom travels from Sodom and Gomorrah, which couldn't have been very far, down on the Jordan Plains, and comes up to Jerusalem as we know it. And the king of Jerusalem, or Salem as it was known then, was a man named Melchizedek. And he was not only a king, but he was also a priest of the God that Abram worshiped. Now remember, this is all pre-Mosaic law. So there is no rites and rituals that are prescribed in the written law at this point. He is a worshiper and a priest in the following of the God of Abraham. And so what we see is that when Melchizedek met with Abram and Sodom's king, so it's like the three of them out here, they've got bread and wine and they're talking, and he said, blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. And so he says these words, and after meeting with Abram gives him 10% or a tithe because of all the spoils that he took And the reason Abram gave him this tithe or this 10% is because Abram recognized Melchizedek as a priest who ranked higher spiritually than he was. And so it's something that, Melchizedek held a place of honor being a priest, that Abram recognized that even though Abraham is this man of tremendous faith, he realizes that Melchizedek is on a whole nother level. And so that's why he gives that offering. Now, the king of Sodom was okay with Abram giving this, but then he's okay with Abram keeping all of the goods, and he just wants the people. And I don't understand that, because the people without their goods are just simply slaves, I guess, but they would have no way of providing for themselves, and now they're a drain on this king who's had this costly battle. But nevertheless, we see that Abram told the king of Sodom, said, I don't want anything from you. I've already made an oath to God that there is never going to be a way you can say, I made Abram rich. And so I thought that was, I'm not going to take a thread. You imagine? I'm not going to take a thread from you. What kind of an insult that is to this king when a very wealthy man like Abram's like, I don't want anything from you. And so you wonder if, as Abram was traveling from Hebron to Dan in pursuit of the four kings, you wonder if he might have asked God to give him victory in his fight against these four kings. And so he must have been praying, and in this time, he must have agreed with God that he wouldn't keep anything out of the stuff that they won in this battle if God would just give them victory. And so that's what we see. Abram didn't he did negotiate and accept the food for their men and the shares that his partners would have kept for themselves. And so the king of Sodom got away with getting Abram's share, which was a quarter of everything that came back, so to speak. And so we see that that's how that worked. Now, each night we're ending our series or our study looking at the life lessons learned from Abraham. And, this has been this wild, crazy ride for Abraham in this one chapter. And there are probably several lessons that we can find here. One is, don't live in the city, right? You might get captured and taken somewhere you don't want to go. And being a country boy, I understand that completely. But that's not biblical. What we see, though, is that in Genesis chapter 14, God blesses us, and so we should give back to him when he blesses us. Now, when Abram defeated the four kings after they'd captured Lot and they took all the spoils from Sodom and Gomorrah, he could have kept it all. He could have divided it with his alliance, and they would have been set more so than they already were. But instead, we see he came, and the first thing he did was give a tenth of his spoils from the four kings to Melchizedek. He went ahead, God had blessed him, so he gave God an offering by giving to Melchizedek. And he gave his alliance members their parts of the four kings' spoils and the spoils from the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, it would have taken Abram at least 7 to 8 days, as we said, for him to reach from Hebron to Dan. It would have taken at least 7 or 8 days at the very least. And during those days of travel, we can be confident that this man of faith, Abram, is riding on a horse or a donkey as he goes, and he is asking for God's blessings on the battle that is about to happen, asking for safety for him and his men and all the ones that are aligned with him. And after God provided Abram with a victory, Abram naturally gave back to God an offering as a thank you for the blessing of victory against those four kings. And the way Abram was able to do that most quickly and easily was to give a tenth of all his spoils to Melchizedek. Now, when God blesses us, our natural reaction should be to give back an offering to God as a thank you for that blessing that he's given to us. Now think about it. I hope you're not going out and like plundering and taking spoils from raids and stuff like that. If you are, let's talk after the service, and that's not a good thing to do. But, the most regular way that God is able to bless us is the health and ability for us to work to make a living. right? That's the easiest way for him to bless us, to provide for us in ways like this. And so when we receive the benefits of that blessing, namely a paycheck, when we receive that, then we should naturally give back an offering to God as a thank you for the blessings that he's given to us. The blessings of the finances he's given us, the blessings of the good health and all that he's given to us. And the easiest way for us is not to go chase down some priest king named Melchizedek. The easiest way for us to do this is for us to give to our offering through the church. It's the easiest way for us to live out the lesson that we see in Abraham's life, that when God blesses us, we give back to him as a thank you. And the easiest way for us to do that is to give to the offering at church. And so that is our study for tonight on a very action-packed chapter in Genesis chapter 14. And as always, I'll open up the floor. Are there any questions? I was waiting for somebody to say, you mispronounced that one name, Pastor. Yes, Joanne. He was the king. Melchizedek was the king of Jerusalem or Salem. He was the king, but he was also a priest of God. But yes, he was the king of of Jerusalem, and the king of Sodom was a completely different individual. And so what happens is when Abram and his group comes back from the north, they stop in Jerusalem and they meet Melchizedek, and the king of Sodom comes over and meets with Abram and his group. And because I get, it's sort of like when they were coming to try and, hey, let us have our stuff back, type of thing. That's a good one though. Any other questions? A tenth of everything. Right. Well, I think that what Abram gave to Melchizedek was a tenth of the spoils he got from the four kings, not from the stuff that had been taken from Sodom and Gomorrah. Because think about that. How would that have looked for Abram to give an offering off of the king of Sodom's stuff to Melchizedek? It would have been contradictory to what he said about, I don't want anything from you. And so for him to have taken a part of it and given it, I don't personally think that it was a tenth of everything they brought back. I think it was a tenth of at least Abram's portion of the four kings' spoils, because they would have had a lot of food and supplies and things that they would have taken from those four kings, plus the stuff from Sodom and Gomorrah. So I think that what Abram gave was a tenth of his portion, his quarter of the four kings stuff. And the whole thing about Melchizedek and the pre-incarnate Christ, that's a whole nother Bible study. Any other questions? Those are good questions. No other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank you for being here tonight, and want to encourage you to be back on Wednesday night. We'll continue in our study of the early church, and so I hope that you'll be here for that. Next Sunday morning is our WMU Sunday, Baptist Women's Day, and so we'll have a guest speaker. We'll have Ruby Fulbright, Ellis Fulbright's wife, who will be speaking on Sunday, and so we're looking forward to hearing from her and having our ladies take charge of the service on Sunday, so we're looking forward to that. And then next Sunday night, we will be in Genesis chapter 15, and so I hope that you'll be here for that. And so with all of that being shared with you, I'm going to ask Rob if he would to close us out with